Who was Joseph of Arimathea? Good question. A lot of people, when you say Joseph in the Bible, you think of Joseph from the book of Exodus and down in Egypt, or you think about Joseph, the husband of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And not too many people know about Joseph of Arimathea. Who is he? Hi, my name's Jim Smith. I'm lead pastor of San Antonio Heights Community Church. And if you're ever in the area, join us, 10:15. Joseph of Arimathea. Now, no one knows where Arimathea is. It's somewhere near Jerusalem, but he was doing a good job. If you read the Bible, it says this about Joseph, that he did his job well. It says, now there was a good and righteous man named Joseph. He was a member of the Jewish High Council. And Mark mentions that Joseph was an honored member of the High Council. So he's part of the High Council, or the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Sanhedrin was kind of like the Supreme Court of the ancient Jewish times. During the time of Jesus, Sanhedrin was the high court, the Jewish high court. There was only one other court that was higher than that, and that was the Roman Empire and the Caesar. And Caesar could determine if you're going to kill someone or not. They didn't have the ability to commit someone to die, but they could do anything else, and they ran the country. And during that time of Jesus, there were four major political parties, if you would call them that. There were the Zealots, who hated the Romans and wanted the Romans out. And then you had the Essenes, who were kind of separatists. They lived in a community. A lot of times they would live out in the desert. Some people said maybe John the Baptist was involved in that community for a while because he was out in the wilderness. And then you have two main parties, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And this made up the Jerusalem Council. And so Joseph was highly favored, honored as a member of the Sanhedrin. You have a job, whatever your job is, do it well. God's given you talents, God's given you abilities, and like Joseph, do it well for the glory of God. Work as if you are working for God. Wherever you are, just make God look good, because you're a disciple of Jesus. You're a follower of Jesus. You let it be known that I follow Jesus. I'm a Christian. So do your job well. Be a good employee. Be a good employer. And then secondly, Joseph spoke up for the truth. You read here, it says, but Joseph, he had not agreed with the decision and the actions of the other religious leader. He was from the town of Arimathea in Judea, and he's waiting for the kingdom of God to come. But he noticed in the Sanhedrin, they didn't follow procedures when they arrested Jesus. Actually, Jesus had 6 different trials. He had one with the former high priest, Annas, and they took Jesus there in the middle of the night. Then he met with some members of the Sanhedrin and the high priest currently, who was the son-in-law of Annas. His name was Caiaphas. That's in the middle of the night. Then they quickly got a kangaroo court, members of the Sanhedrin, early in the morning when the sun was just coming up. And they had a kangaroo court, sentenced him to death, but they couldn't kill him, so they had to send him to Pilate. Pilate then met with him and said, I don't want to make a judgment on this. Sent him to King Herod. King Herod didn't do anything about Jesus, just kind of laughed and sent him back to Pilate. And then Pilate eventually sentenced him to death. 6 trials, but they were all illegal. And Joseph knew that. Just a sample of things that were illegal. They never should hold court at night. They don't do it during a special holiday or feast, which it was the Passover. You don't arrest someone secretly. It's always public, and they did it at night. They arrested him without any formal charges, which they needed to have. They needed to have at least 2 or 3 witnesses. When they got together, they couldn't find 2 witnesses to agree with that. But they never should have had the witness, the criminal, the one who was arrested, self-incriminate himself. It was against the law. Then you never make a verdict the same day. There's something about a waiting period to reconsider at 2 to 3 days. They did it the very same day. And they didn't vote properly. They vote from the youngest to the oldest in a very formal way. Here they just said, who thinks he's guilty? And they all raised their hand, yes. Sometimes even in our culture today, there's people that just hate something so badly, they don't even look for the truth. Joseph spoke up for the truth. He spoke up and said, this is not right. We sometimes need to speak up and say, this is not right. This is not right. We as believers need to stand up for the truth, and all truth is God's truth. And so stand up, do your work well, and then stand up for the truth. And thirdly about Joseph is that we need to stand up in the gap. Joseph of Arimathea took a risk and went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. But Romans, when a criminal died, they usually let him on a cross. And animals would come, birds would come and peck out his eyes, and animals would come and devour a body as best they could. Usually a body wasn't so high up, it was just off the ground a little bit. Or they would just take the body and throw it into a dump, Gehenna, where there's garbage burning all the time. And Joseph just couldn't stand allowing the body of Jesus to do that. Someone's got to do it. And he looked around, where are the disciples? Joseph could have been at the crucifixion, we don't know, but he looked around, he just saw the women, they weren't able to do anything, and the disciples were gone. So he says, someone's got to do it. And there are times in our life that you got to go say, someone's got to do it. And you look around, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? And Joseph said, I'm standing up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to stand in the gap. It says this in Ezekiel. God said this. He said, I looked for someone who might rebuild the wall of righteousness that guards the land. I searched for someone to stand in the gap in the wall so I wouldn't have to destroy the land, but I found no one. No one was there to speak up and tell people that they were acting wrong. There are times we got to stand in the gap. No one's doing it. Stand in the gap. Speak up. Speak up for the truth. Now, he was an influential member of the Sanhedrin. Not anyone could go to Pilate, so you imagine they knew one another. Pilate comes in, hey, what do you need? This has been a tough day. He goes, I'd like to take the body down. He had an influence. He had a reputation. And then he took a risk and asked for the body of Jesus. You ask yourself, when was the last time you took a risk and stood up for something that was right, stood up for godly principles, stood up for Jesus? And then fourthly, though, honor Christ when there's no apparent reward. Pilate gave permission. Joseph came and took the body away. And with him came Nicodemus. And it's always good to have a partner. The man who had come to Jesus at night. He brought 75 pounds of perfumed ointment made from myrrh and aloes. That was not cheap. That was expensive. So they had a partnership. They had money. They invested in their money with these 75 pounds of ointment and spices. And following the Jewish burial custom, they wrapped Jesus' body with spices in long sheets of linen, and they placed the place of the crucifixion was near a garden where there was a new tomb, which Matthew says was Joseph's. It's expensive to carve out a rock, a cave, but they made a burial place out of this rock. And Joseph said, use it. Joseph wasn't bold and faithful and took a risk because he knew what was coming. He didn't figure out what was going on. His Messiah just died. He goes, what is going on? But he took a step of faith, even though he didn't know what was going on, didn't have it all figured out. But he said, you know what? I'm going to just do that. And there's no apparent reward. Sometimes you just do things because you want to honor Christ, and you can't figure out why or where it's going, but you know what's right, and you stand up and do the right thing. So 4 questions to wrap this up. Where do you need courage? Where do you have influence, and how can you use it for the glory of God? What resources or opportunities do you have right now that you can use for the glory of God? And what's your next bold step of faith? Joseph reminds us that you don't have to be loud to be faithful. Hey, thanks for checking us out. Have a great week. Bye-bye.